Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Right, I'll draw attention to, I'll not to dwell too long on this, but because we've been through a lot of this before, but I'll draw your attention to page 16, and if you look at the outturn variance, we actually come in at the year end at a 4.46 underspend, and you may recall at the last meeting it was we were forecasting a 1.5 roughly underspend. Well, I need to point out here that within that 4.5 million underspend, we have included a 3.1 million Schedule 38 monies, and this is for this is monies you get from developers to pay for long-term repairs of roads. So that's a bit of a debatable argument there. So, but the important point here is that either way, whether that's we include that after the audit or not, it'll be the right side of the line. If you then turn over to page, back to page 15, you'll see that the capital 5.4, there's actually a typo there. That 36.8 should read 39.9, which will be our reserves going into the following year. So, but of course that does include that 3.1. Moving on, the other thing I would highlight for you before I close down on this is that we have put on page 37, you'll see there's a 10.24 million provision for bad debt. Well, we hope we're being pessimistic there, and we'll see. It's a provision, not a write-off. Big difference, as I'm sure you all know. And the current financial year will end up dictating what that finally ends up as. But at the moment, we believe we've been prudent and cleaned our act up in that area. Lots of other bits and bobs, but the upshot of it is we came on the right side of the line. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Longley. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. As the portfolio holder has mentioned, the 3.1 Section 38 money in 5.22, I just wanted to ask a question just to make sure I've got an understanding of that. As I understand it, that's money that developers are paying for the future use of road repairs, for their new developments. So I guess the fact that you're spending it all in year leads us to have future liabilities down the line, and I guess those liabilities will eventually push themselves onto the unitary councils. So my question really, I'm just quite not sure how it works for the unitaries for the two districts, North and West. If, for example, all that money came from developers in the North, then that would presumably mean that there will be greater pressure on the West. You know, is the money that you're using in the general fund being split equitably between the areas that it came from? That's really my question.
Thank you. Councillor Haycroft.
Thank you, and an apology from Councillor Davenport. Within the revenue budgets, the obvious issues of libraries is within. One of the things that occurred to me and to others is if you can't afford a house, often there are options like shared ownership, where you buy a part of that property and you rent a part of that property. Given the obvious pressure on libraries, would the portfolio holder consider, as you look at the business plans, the option, for example, in the case of Rothwell, where it's 460,000, to look at the possibility of the town or other persons purchasing half and renting half, with the option in the longer term future to take the pressure off, to be able to buy the remainder and to fully own that library. It just occurred to me that's one of the ways we solve housing problems, and it could be one of the ways to solve some of the pressures you'll be reading in those business plans. And how quickly could that be evaluated? Don't necessarily expect an answer now because you had no prior notice to that. to the portfolio holder, what consideration has been given to applying the principles of lean processes to the processes of the council? How close are we to getting the headroom that the portfolio holder mentioned necessary to implement a pay increase for our staff? Will the portfolio holder confirm that rescheduling of pensions payments will not reappear as a means of filling revenue gaps?
So we're talking about last year, because we're talking about last year's outturn budget report.
I'm talking about all sorts of things, Leader. Would the portfolio holder agree with me?
Councillor Hakewell. These need to be relevant to the...
It is relevant to either budget this year or last year. I've asked the question. If the portfolio doesn't want to answer it, that's fine. Would the portfolio holder agree with me that there are little or no differences in the management of revenue budgets today than there was in the past, and that capital dispensations one-off measures, as we just heard section 38, increased council tax, are simply a veneer covering the core problems until it's impossible under the new unitaries to unpick the current failures? And those are my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Morris, did you have a point to make?
On the paper?
Yeah.
Yes, Chair, I do. Yes, I was just going to refer to recommendation 3 to do with the settlement of 100k from the Shaw Healthcare. Under the current contract that we have with them, I just wanted to mention the hard work that's been done to try and rework that contract with Shaw Healthcare, and that the work is continuing to make that as an efficient as possible contract for us. We can't mention here the reasons the reasons behind the deduction because it's commercially sensitive, but I just wanted to assure everyone that we are working very hard with Shaw to make sure that that contract is as productive as it can be for this council going forward, and that the beds within the Shaw contract are used in the correct way. So that was it, Chair. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make some comments with regard to the outturn of last year and just recognise the immense effort and amount of hard work that officers, and I've said it a number of times at this meeting, officers, the input of the commissioners and cabinet and all members have put into achieving this underspend. We have to, and I'm not sounding celebrationary or anything like that, I think we've got to acknowledge where we were, put this in the context of where we were exactly a year ago when we just issued another section 114 notice, and you know, we've got some reserves. We've got a reasonable amount of reserves now. It's not an ideal amount. We know we would like more. We've got some reserves in place, and we've managed to bring the budget in last year, and that is an immense achievement. No matter what anybody says about, you know, the capital dispensation, which didn't help us in last year, but helped us with the previous year. But I just want to say thank you to all the staff, the input of the commissioners, and everybody else in helping us to achieve this position now, because it is quite a remarkable achievement given where we were a year ago, and I just wanted to make sure that is heard loud and clear. Councillor Longley, did you want to comment on some of those questions and perhaps bring in Mr Duncan?
Yeah, I certainly will. I'll go back to start off with Mick Scrimshaw's, Councillor Scrimshaw. You did actually say the 3.1 million spend. We're not spending the money. It's an argument. Well, you know very well, we had a fairly lengthy discussion last Thursday afternoon, well, a normal get-together pre-cabinet with Mick, and we sort of talked around this 3.1 and the significance of it. And you've got two choices to do. You either, because the cash is in the bank, that's the important point. You're not spending it. You can either put it in the accounts, as we've done, shown here, or you can leave it out and put it in progressively over a period of years. Personal view is we do what we're doing, but we'll see where it goes. But you have two choices, as you know. Where it goes in the north and south, well, that's a very good question. And, you know, I've often looked at Chris and Mick when we meet on a Thursday as more of colleagues, because there are some quite good ideas come out, and that's one that is interesting, to say the least. Turning to Jim's questions there, the library option, that's, again, another interesting. I know I'm not involved in the libraries other than looking at the business plans when they finally end up, but I'm sure that's been noted, and another good idea. Lean processes, yes, I'm very familiar with lean processes. I've been what is lean. I look over there to Paul, he'll know. And there's quite a lot of, I call it productivity, but I don't know what's in a word. And that's what Paul's been doing. That's his job, and still is. Pay increase. Well, I've not involved in the detail of it in the operational side, but my only position on that is that is exactly what I've said all along. Is if we've got the money, we'll do it. If we haven't, we can't, and that's pretty straightforward. Regarding pension payments, I was very disappointed last year that it didn't go the way we wanted it. I'm not going to make any comments on this year, but everything's still on the table. You know, we'll watch this space, is what I'd say there. And I'd completely disagree with you here, Jim, about there's no differences in how the council money has been spent. We're by no means perfect, and probably never will be, but we're dramatically better than we were, I think. And, Chair, that's about sums up position, I think.
Thank you. I'll just ask Councillor Bone to make a brief comment regarding the library point.
Yeah, Councillor Hakewill. I mean, it's a novel idea. I guess because you've only just recently thought of it, it hasn't been fed into the business plans. So I think that's probably the place where it would be put. But I certainly think it's worth considering, and it'll obviously depend on whether we can, you know, financially do that. But it's certainly an interesting idea.
Okay, thank you. Cabinet, do we agree the report? Thank you. Move on to item 7, the monthly capital report, final outturn for financial year ending 31st March 2019. Councillor Longley.
Right, thank you, Chair. Right, I'll refer you all back to the budget proposals back in February, which we made the point there that anything spent in the capital area has an impact on the revenue line, inevitably so. If you buy a car and you borrow the money, you impact your spend down the track. So therefore, we made 4 points of how we would spend capital from then on. And there was anything that comes in on a 106 money, well, that's fair enough, we've got to do that, or 38 for that matter. Any grants that we get, that's straightforward, you get granted for specific purposes, and we would use it for that purpose. We would maybe sell some capital items, get capital receipts, and spend that on other capital. That's changing one asset for another, that's fair enough. And finally, the most important of the lot was the productivity argument. We go back to Jim's point there. And you would, in fact, invest if you can get a decent payback. Each of those are considered on their merit. So with that in mind, and if you turn to page 45, we kicked off with an opening budget of 129, and in fact the final outturn is 89, moving in a direction as specified. So, and if you actually move on to the projected number for this financial year, it goes down to 77. So it's getting the balance between the capital and the right purposes. So my personal view is that this is a very comprehensive and capable report by the officers, and I recommend it to you because I think it's now back in control. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Cabinet, do we have any comments? Just make the point that this is £89 million worth of investment in Northamptonshire, and that has to be welcome and recognised. I think we've made the point several times that we remain good at levering in money into the county. We've got to make sure we're still at the table, given the trajectory into unitary, the likes of SEMLEP and all the other pots that we can pull from to make sure we carry on delivering over this next couple of years and we set the foundations for the future. Thank you. Cabinet, do we agree with the report? Agreed. Thank you. Item 8, Councillor Longley, period 2. Right. This budget year.
Here we go again. If you look at page 61, there was that. This is again. This was the subject of considerable discussion and on last Thursday afternoon, and you've got to bear in mind now we're talking about period 2. We've got a long way to go to the year end, and so we're trying to put in forecasts that are realistic and prudent. and that we believe we can actually meet. And if you look at that chart there, we're looking currently, we're projecting an overspend of 5.77, call it 6 million. The overwhelming bulk of which, of course, is in children's. Now, we all know we've gone through a difficult time with children's. We're not out of the woods there. So we're putting what we think is a sensible forecast in. What it means is, of course, we've got work to do. Well, what a surprise. And we intend to do it. And I'm very confident that our officers are up to the mark. But we've got a lot of work to do. We're currently looking at an overspend, and we've started already looking at ways we can combat that. My real feel for this is to get a proper look at Q1. You're beginning to see a pattern develop then, and of course we're now into the second quarter just. So as soon as those numbers out, I think we'll have a proper handle on where we're going to the year end. It's still a little bit premature to get too excited about that number. Bear in mind also that that's a little bit less than 1% of our total spend. So this is an area of considerable interest. It'll get considerable energy, and I will report back as the year goes on. My major concern here is in children's. The others have got issues, of course they have, but my major concern is in children's because that could well get worse before it gets better. I hope not, but we'll see. But if it does, I will tell you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Defer to Councillor Scrimshaw.
Thank you again, Chair. This report shows the Council's overall financial position just 2 months into the new financial year, and already predicts an overspend, as has been said, of just under £6 million. That in itself isn't unusual. There's been a history at NCC of monthly Cabinet reports projecting overspends early in the financial year, with time throughout the rest of the year to make adjustments and take mitigation action. But what's different now is that the current financial position of the Council is not usual. There's very little room for flexibility or room for manoeuvre. In the past, the Council may have had the opportunity to deal with overspends, but there are fewer options now. What's also worrying is this doesn't come as a surprise. Some of us said at the time of the budget setting that the budget was not robust enough and would start falling apart very early on in the year. That seems to be happening. We spoke of how the forecasting of demand in children and adult social care couldn't be relied on, and of some of the £40 million worth of saving proposals not being thought out properly or certain. Those are the reasons we felt unable to support the budget in the first place. Today, we see that that's exactly these issues that are causing problems. Extra demand and higher costs in both children's services, which is where the majority of the overspend is, and also adults are being recorded. These pressures already have had to be mitigated by the use of the Council's meagre reserves, and we all know that these reserves will run out very quickly if that position continues. We also see throughout the report that pressures are coming from some of those individual saving proposals, the ones we said were ill thought out and not robust, and they're already being written off as undeliverable. If it's clear that they can't be delivered this early in the financial year, we have to ask ourselves, why were they in the budget in the first place? While the financial pressure is mainly being shown, particularly in the children's services, please don't understand the position in adults. Already that service too has had to find a way of dealing with more than £6 million worth of extra pressures. And frankly, it seems they've done an amazing job in doing so. But that can't continue. There will be at very least huge effects on the levels of service provided and therefore on the day-to-day lives of our residents that rely on those services. There simply isn't the flexibility in the Council's finances for it to mean anything else. However, now we have this report, now we know the current position, it at least gives us something to work with. Scrutiny will now be able to start its monitoring of the in-year budget position when it meets at the end of this month, and while the report gives the headlines, the devil will be very much in the detail, and I hope that the one-sentence overviews and short comments provided in this report will be able to look at that in much more detail. All of us need to have a real understanding of exactly what's causing the problem if we're going to realistically find solutions. Senior officers, cabinet members,
if you could finish
and indeed
off, please.
backbenchers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hakel.
Thank you, Leader. Effectively, Councillor Scrimshaw has said it, so I can be much more brief. But year on year, we've sat in front of exactly the same figures for as long as I've been on the council, since 2013. We're 3 months in, we've got £5 million worth of overspend. We don't know how that is scheduled across the 12 months, but quite clearly the mitigations are taking services away from people as well. It's just really the exact same point as Councillor Scrimshaw has said, that unless we find one-off mitigations through this year, we're in exactly the same position as we were in the past. How has it come about that we've overspent by 5.4 million on a budget that was agreed in February?
Okay, thank you. So before we go back to Councillor Longleaf, I've got a few points to make. First point, Councillor Scrimshaw said about being written off as undeliverable. I'm certainly not aware of any of the projected savings being written off as undeliverable. And of course, the pressure is through the demand services, and we can't just turn off that tap. What I do want to say, though, is I think this means of reporting, and we've got the graph in there on page 79, is a very open and transparent way of demonstrating exactly where we are. And I think in the past we haven't had this openness and clarity on exactly where we are at this given point. And as Councillor Longley said, this is very early in the year still, and we're not at the end of the first quarter, and there will be a deep dive after quarter one. I think we need to also to acknowledge that given where we were last year and the amount of money that was taken out of the budget, to actually show that we've got a £5 million pressure at looking at the end of the year at the moment is still a significant achievement. We need to recognise that. One thing I will be doing is speaking with the Chief Executive, I do regularly, and perhaps I could ask Teresa to make a comment about giving us some assurance that everything is being done in terms of monitoring the budget to bring in this forecast overspend. I wonder if you could offer us a comment. Thank you.
I welcome the opportunity, Leader, to do that. When I arrived here, which was 11 months ago, we didn't know how much we owed. We didn't know how much we had to save for the year that we were in, and we hadn't got a budget planned for the following year. To say we're in a very different position this year, I think, is a major understatement. What we do know is what we know, which is what we have in challenges in terms of savings. We can be transparent about that, which we are in the reports, and we know that we have a projected currently a projected overspend at the end of this year, which is not 64.2 million as we had last year. It is quite small in comparison, but it's still a concern for me nonetheless. And fragile is an understatement as a word in terms of our current finances, and we have to be mindful of that all of the time in everything we do. Whilst we're not operating under a 114 notice, we are still operating as though we are under a Section 114 notice. So we're being very prudent about everything we do and everything we spend as officers and members. And it's been scrutinised very thoroughly and very transparently. And I think that's very different than it was when I arrived here. We certainly know where everything is. We know where our challenges are. We know where we can and we can't deliver savings and where those challenges. But one thing people need to recognise and realise, well, actually two things. One is there's two very large, very demand-led services in the council, as there are in every council. And you cannot predict demand in hospitals over the winter. You cannot predict demand. It just takes one or two children to come into children's services, or one or two families to completely blow your budget. You cannot predict for that. What you have is a stable organisation normally. So the second thing I would say, this is still an organisation that is not completely stabilised. We've come out of a very, very difficult time, and there's still a lot to do. We're still not a perfect organisation. And I sometimes think, because we've managed to balance last year's budget, that there is an expectation that we'll somehow produce everything that's perfect going forward. We won't, and we cannot, because the organisation still lacks capacity in areas, and we're still not an organisation that is what I would consider to be high performing. We're high performing in adults, and you've seen that in the press a couple of weeks ago. We're one of the highest performing in the country in terms of our performance in adults and one of the lowest costs. So yes, we can do that and we can perform well, but we're a long way from being perfect. So I would remind members of all parties to realise that we're still a struggling organisation to keep ahead of ourselves. We have 2 more years to survive and give the unitary councils the best start in life we can possibly give them. And the way to do that is to balance our books, to keep ourselves stable and not get carried away and think that this is an organisation that's going to be here for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. I just want to reaffirm that point as well. It's very clear on our role as the administration now on that run into unitary that, and we've said this a number of times before, we've got to do everything within our powers to put the finances and the services in the best place possible to give the unitaries the best chance of thriving from day one. And that's what we're very focused and dedicated on delivering. Councillor Longley, did you want to come back?
Yeah, first of all, I'd thank Councillor Mick Scrimshaw for outlining just how difficult the job is. We all know that. It's not easy. But it's not falling apart. Mick, that's a silly word. It's a difficult job, always will be, and we're making a forecast. That's all it is at this stage. Way too far off to get too excited about that. It's a forecast. We've got 10 months to go. A lot of water will go under the bridge. A lot of it will be negative. A lot of it will be positive. So you've got to do it really look at the first quarter to get beginning to get a feel for it more than this being precise. You can't be at this stage. What's going to happen? We're going to get a harsh winter, a good winter. Who knows? Who knows? So I think that the thing to do is say it's too far off to have a deep discussion on this. What I do know is that the officers get together on a very regular basis, and if I'm any judge of the characters, then there will be some serious talking about how this year end comes out correctly, and we'll see where that goes. Written off programmes, yeah, some get written. The nature of cost reduction is like that. You tend to do better in some, worse in others. Some fall apart. And you bring new ones in. It's a never-ending process. You just never stop doing it. So I wouldn't take that very seriously, that comment. But anyway, notwithstanding that, 5.777 is the current forecast. That will change, I've no doubt. The worry there is children's. We've got an Ofsted report coming soon, and what that'll bring. So you've got to take a more pessimistic view at this point in time. You don't take an optimistic view. And so, Chair, I just recommend that this goes through as it stands.
Okay, Cabinet, do we agree with the report? Thank you. Item 9, monthly capital report, forecast outturn, period 2. Councillor Longley.
Good evening again. Right, well, it's all said it really in the top line. Note the forecast capital expenditure of 77 million. As I said earlier on, that's down on last year, which is down on the budget. The best thing I can do here is say, look, it's just a much tighter operation, and this is the full year because current officers were in the chair partway through last year, so this is a tighter, more tightly controlled than previously, in my judgment. And I think probably anybody's got any detailed questions, that's probably the best way of handling this, because all the information should be there for anybody to see. Thank you.
Okay. Cabinet, any comments? Okay, no comments from opposition. Okay. Cabinet, nothing further to add, I don't think. Are we happy to agree the report?
Yes.
Thank you. So item 10 is the corporate performance report 2018-19 quarter 4. So this is in my name. So I'm very pleased to present this report to Cabinet. This is a quarterly report providing an insight into the Council's overall performance against a set of previously agreed KPIs. This report covers the period January to March 2019 and includes any year-end annual indicators reported in this period. There are 36 indicators reporting in the corporate scorecard this quarter, and of these, 14 are performing on or above target, 15 are performing below target, and 7 indicators have trend-based indicators. There are a further 20 indicators within the corporate scorecard which are not shown this quarter because they are reported on annually, but not on a financial year cycle. These will be reported on the quarter they do become available. Councillor Bowen, you had some comments to make.
Okay, so just going to the specifics, if we were to look at the Council Plan Priority for Health and Wellbeing, the first area to highlight is the NHS Health Check Programme. I think the point there is this is a national programme that we don't actually have any control over. The GPs administer it. We campaign for those programmes our end, but it is up to the surgeries to implement that programme. And then when we move to smoking, which is the next one down, you'll see our actual against the target is 10% less. There, what I would say is that there's going to be a new contract change, which will hopefully improve the uptake on the reduction in smoking. The other point to make there is that vaping is not recorded, and this is sort of an area that's quite interesting at the moment because there are no surveys that have proven whether vaping is detrimental to health. However, I mean, if you look at bagpiping, which obviously not many people do, but if you are a bagpiper, there is actually a disease associated which is similar to vaping. So that is an area of research that is currently being undertaken and will be recorded in the figures in the future. If you go down again to air pollution, which I know we've raised a lot here at Cabinet and at full council, and it is a concern to us all, their actual at the moment is 5.3% with a target to reduce. It is definitely an intention by NCC in the business rate retention monies to pilot a traffic management system to try and improve the stop and start through flow in the urban areas, which will hopefully have an impact on reduction in environmental pollution, and we are hoping to start on that area quite soon. And then finally, if we look at electively home educated children, which is also in the matrices under education and skills. This has also been raised. I think it was Councillor Birch has raised it on several occasions, and quite right to be concerned about this area because it's about how you manage it, and it is a very difficult area to manage. And as you can see there, we actually have 1,018 children that are currently home educated. I think it's worth pointing out that parents do have the right to home educate, so it's not something that we can stop, but I can understand the concerns around children that are excluded, particularly if they've got specific educational needs. Recently, there's now an education outreach team that is going into homes across Northamptonshire to look at this area and to try and monitor those children in their homes more effectively. It is a national issue all over the UK, and NCC is very minded of the fact that we have had an increase in those numbers. So those are the areas that I just wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. Councillor Morris, did you have a comment to make?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight the sections that relate to adult social care, which are on page 13, 14, page 13 and 14. And in particular, there was the DTOC delayed transfers of care per 100,000 population for social care, which is showing, I believe, an overall trend that's down, but it is one of the ones that we have to keep an eye on because it was one of the pressures that we have generally with our service. So I wanted to point that one out. And there were a couple of others there that show some of the pressures that the service is generally under. If you look at on page 14, the second one down, rehabilitation at home 91 days after discharge from hospital. The facts are there in the right-hand column, but it's showing that the trend is slightly reducing. But overall, these show that the pressures that the service is under generally, but showing some good work in bringing those trends down generally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I just wonder if Anna, Director, would just like to add comment. I picked up on the DTOC number and the fact that we have slipped. Whether you could give us a comment on that, Anna?
Yes, by all means. So I think nationally you've seen quite a lot of pressure on detox, and I think you'll find that we will be in line with everybody else. I've raised before that we're seeing sort of 90 admissions a day at the moment into our 2 acute hospitals, 91% of which are people over 65, and this is the group that is largely delayed. We are still doing record numbers of discharges, but as fast as we are removing people, people are being admitted to hospital. So while overall, statistically, your number goes down, we are still moving an incredible amount of people, and I think you'll find that nationally every other authority will be in a very similar position. This is also to the period at the end of March, and April and March were incredibly challenging months. It was like a very late winter for social care, which is also one of the reasons we got a knock-on impact to budgets this year. So I still don't think we should be disheartened. There's some really good work, but the demand and stemming that demand in the long term in communities is obviously what it's all about for us.
Thank you. I just want to recognise that performance on people remaining in their homes after being discharged from hospital. That's down to some good hard work in our departments, basically. Also, the performance of our adoption teams, percentage of children in care replaced for adoption within 12 months remains steady and reasonable. And also, just finally, the point on page 17 where it talks about the employment rate in Northamptonshire is higher than it was at the same point a couple of years ago, and that we're 3.4% above the national average, which is a very positive point. Very positive point. Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Defer to Councillor Ward.
Afternoon. I just wanted, I have some specific questions which you are aware of, because as we have changed the structure of Cabinet where backbenchers are no longer allowed to ask questions.
We are being allowed to ask a question now, so can you ask it, please?
Where I've submitted questions in advance, I haven't got the responses for it, and this was the mitigation of stopping backbenchers asking questions. I'm very fortunate that my group have allowed me this opportunity to address...
Well, sorry, Councillor Roy, this is the process by which we've got in place. You've been nominated to come and speak and ask a question. You have submitted some questions, and we will be getting back to you on those questions. So do you have anything...
So what's the point when I don't get the response before you make the decision? What's the point of that? I asked specific questions about the analysis of permanent exclusions. I've asked this before, and I'd asked for breakdowns of this before. This information wasn't provided to me when I've asked for it before. And we've come to this Cabinet meeting, and it's still not being provided to me. We're back to the kind of things Max Caller raised in his report, that councillors ask questions and aren't given the responses to that.
I will make sure you get responses to your questions, and I think if any councillor can ask any question any time through either myself or the respective portfolio holder, and we will make sure you get an answer. You don't necessarily have to wait until Cabinet, and the whole idea of Cabinet is it is the meeting of Cabinet held in public, and we have got a process by which you can ask a question at Cabinet, and going back to the point, you can ask a question any time of any of us. You don't have to wait until here. So the point of having questions is being in relation to the items that Cabinet is discussing.
So my question specifically, as I said, related to the issue around... My question specifically, some of my questions were specifically related to the increased rate of exclusions and asking for a demographic breakdown of it, and to see whether SEND and in particular racial minorities might be overrepresented in that. The other thing is the very, very high rate of children being home educated. Now, I accept Councillor Bowen's statement that actually parents make decisions. However, from our Labour group, we do have anecdotal evidence of actually families being encouraged to take their children out of school. This is a big safeguarding issue, and we are not talking about small numbers here. And it is something that is of a critical importance to an authority where we actually have a poorly performing children's Services Department. I just think we've got such incredible staff who work so very hard, but just simply are not supported by such structural issues, like not paying them enough. So, yeah, can you give me some answer to my questions? And can you give them to me? Because this was put in as mitigation for stopping backbenchers asking questions.
No, it wasn't. Okay, thank you. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Leader. The report I'm reading is quite specific, and it gives a lot of issues that are of great interest to me. What I want to speak about is one of the very important issue that I'm very concerned with. You might have known that the rates of asthma through air pollution is increased, and lots of school children are now suffering from this disease, which can be, as some of you may know, life-threatening. We've taken certain, my group has taken certain positions in zero carbon emissions. We want to see in 2030 come into place. And I think the County Council has got to take on board some of the responsibilities for these areas. Why do I say that? It's quite clear to me that we have to encourage cars to go electric, and if we don't do that, if we don't come up, there's not much future, as I see it, for young people in this world today, because our planet will not be able to sustain younger people if people of our generation or my generation don't take this on board. Why am I making this statement? It's quite simple in terms, is that I think we've got to encourage and we've got to liaise with the Borough Council to get electric charge points in place. I understand, I've talked to the Councillor Mike Hallam, and the last time he told me, I think there was only about 10 specific areas that had these electric charge points in place, and they're not in strategic points which we should have. We have to, I would suggest, perhaps, as part of, it could be part of the scrutiny process to look into this, and I think it's quite sensible for us to do this. And I also think, Leader, it's your responsibility to dictate to not to dictate, but to liaise with your cabinet to try to get more electric charging points throughout Northampton. And if we don't achieve this, then how are we going to have zero carbon rated in 2030? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haycourt, did you indicate?
I did.
Thank you.
I answered that one right. Really, just to pick up on that, I have an electric car, and we don't need necessarily to wait for charging points. 99% of the time, my car charges overnight. I hardly ever charge anywhere else. It's only people on a longer distance, so it requires employers. The only place I can't charge it apparently is here, but never mind, I've got enough to get home. Will the portfolio holder agree with me that all the legislation and independent reports in planning predicates against building houses next to strategic roads anywhere in the county? In particular, a situation has arisen in Rothwell where strategic planning is putting a road right the way through a 700-house estate, with this strategic road intending to move traffic from Desborough to the A6 bypass and ultimately to the A14. Would the portfolio holder for highways impress upon highways colleagues that when they're giving advice to our boroughs and districts, who are often prone to ignoring our highways advice, that we should at all costs resist putting housing adjacent to new homes, particularly where that is not necessary, so that we can keep this statistic going down? The other point about that, and I think it was mentioned by another contributor, that again in the Rothwell situation, a set of traffic lights is being used to manoeuvre traffic from the old A6 onto this new estate. It is far better to have roundabouts where you are not automatically stopping traffic in every direction in their most polluting way, rather than having roundabouts where when the flow is there, clearly those combustion engines are going properly. So I hope that the portfolio holder might impress that on our professionals and try also to impress it on our borough council colleagues who all too often decide to ignore our highways advice.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Baker, did you want to come back on some of the earlier points made?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to come back on a couple of the comments from Councillor Roy. I did speak to Councillor Roy before the meeting and say that there would be an email coming out to her with all the answers to all of her questions. Councillor Roy did ask for a very long and detailed list of questions, which wouldn't have been appropriate for a meeting because we wouldn't have directly off the cuff had all the answers to those questions anyway. So it would be something that in future people should always contact the portfolio holder with questions at any time, not just at times when we can bring them out in the public. Any time you can be considerate and ask these questions. And our DCS has offered Councillor Roy to come into the department where she will go through all these figures with her and explain exactly how this is arrived at, because it's a very complex situation. We do not actually allocate these numbers by ethnic minorities, so we treat everybody the same, but obviously we can find out those numbers if you wish to know the differences. Thank you.
Thank you. I wondered if either Councillor Smithers or Mr Bolton would like to just offer us anything on the environment points made. Mr Bolton.
Leader, I'm quite happy to take up Councillor Hakewell's issues around Rothwell. There is a strategic road going through the development. It's a development proposal. It's not a road that we're planning, but I'll come back to him and answer some of his questions, if I may.
Thank you.
Okay, and I just want to say also that we're certainly not in the business of knocking our district and borough colleagues in terms of whether they take on board or ignore any of our advice, because we are working very closely with them on the unitary programme, and we don't want to cause any detriment.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Only the health of our people breathing in the queue.
Well, we agreed at the last council meeting, and I know a number of the district and borough councils have about the carbon reduction targets, so that's something that we're forming that is cognizant in the policies that we're putting together as we work towards a unitary. So I'm satisfied we will be doing everything we possibly can to address those issues.
Can I come back a sec?
Well,
1 second.
No. Sorry, Dennis. Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Oh, I've lost my power.
Oh, it's sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to build on a bit on what Councillor Baker said, because the report's fairly clear on home-educated children and permanent exclusions on page 11 and page 12. And as she's already said, she's more than happy to delve deeper into those. But this report is an ongoing report with, I think, quite high level but quite detailed still figures in there. I'm surprised that she hasn't seen that, and if she has seen it, maybe she wants more detail. But the other point I was going to make is that we have scrutiny committee, and a lot of these questions that we seem to be asked today seem to be things that could have gone or maybe already have been through scrutiny. It seems quite strange that some of our councillor colleagues wait until we have a cabinet meeting to ask these questions, as Councillor Baker said, but I leave that hanging because really a lot of this could go to scrutiny committee where they could do an in-depth analysis of what they're asking. On the charging points, although I'm straying into Councillor Smithers' area, I do believe the government announced a fund today or yesterday that specifically deals with charging points in town locations and locations all around the country, and I know our team will be bidding very heavily into that, you know, because we're very good at getting money for investment into our county, and they will be looking at that and making an appropriate bid to increase the number of charging points within the town. Obviously that's not my area anymore, but it would be something that certainly we will keep an eye on, and I'm sure Councillor Smithers will as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Meredith, I'm not going to have you getting angry, so very briefly.
No, I'm very pleased with what I've heard. I mean, that is something really positive. But it is just on the issue of the young children who are suffering from asthma. I was wondering if the officer, Lucy, could look into the problems of children with asthma and pollution and sort of liaise it back, and so it can be dealt with here, because I know it is a major problem. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Matt, for that time.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'll come back through Cabinet to you, Dennis, on that point, if we can. Okay, so Cabinet, are we happy to agree the report? Thank you. Item 11 is the schools out-term report. Councillor Longley.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to say anything on this, because if you look on the top line, it says this report is for information only. So there's really nothing to add to it as far as I'm concerned. If anybody, the councillor, has any requirement for further detail, then I will organise it accordingly.
Okay, Cabinet, do we have anything to add? Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. As has been said, it's for an item to note, but there are a couple of things of concern, I think, and we do bring them up, I think, almost every year. And that's in the area of capital balances, and in particular, the carry forward of 610,000 for pupil premium funding. And I do realise it's been very slightly reduced from previous year, but it is still too high. This is money that should be spent on children that need it during the course of the school year. And clearly we've got a significant amount that isn't. I know schools are going through a difficult time, and in the report is listed a number of schools that are in deficit in last year. And I'm sure that's going to be increased this current year. But surely the concentration should be, and our monitoring should be, very effective in the area of pupil premium. And I'd like to ask what's being done about that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally, Director, I wonder if you could make a comment on that.
We do have a duty to make sure that pupil premium, or support schools in making sure that pupil premium is spent on things which are most relevant to the most vulnerable children, and we do have oversight of that, but it nonetheless is a budget which is allocated to schools, and schools will decide how it is spent. So we do try to our greatest endeavours to make sure that schools spend it on the appropriate things. You are right in principle in that at the end of the time there should be none of this left. Schools should have duly spent it on all those children, but I think what schools would argue is that sometimes it's appropriate to hang on to some of this because there are children and changes throughout the financial and academic year that means that we need to keep some flexibility in the system. But there are fairly clear guidelines about how pupils' premium money should be spent, on which children it should be spent on.
Thank you. Come back very briefly, very briefly.
Yeah, I am aware of the rules and regulations surrounding that. I do visit schools. Yeah, but even so, that amount is still much too high. You say some are carried forward, and I can understand that to a certain extent, but not to any great extent at all. It's money there that should be used for the purpose it's intended, for the children that are in need of it. And I think our monitoring should be much stricter in terms of ensuring that that's carried out.
Okay, thank you. The only other thing I would add is that there's periodically a lot in the news about the funding for schools, and again, as we've said previously at this meeting, we support the national campaigns for fairer funding for schools, and it's only right that we do that on behalf of the schools and the children in Northamptonshire. We're still a member of the F40 group, and we're supporting our schools in how they write to MPs to raise this issue, and I know Fiona Baker is involved, Councillor Baker is involved with that. The Cabinet, are we happy to agree the report? Yeah. Thank you. So item 12, the establishment of a minor works budget. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. The proposal is to establish a schools minor work budget, and it's intended to streamline and make the process NCC currently employ to address condition issues in county schools much more efficient. The current process is incident and end-of-life led. The school minor works budget will be informed by a rolling programme of condition surveys that will ensure NCC take a more proactive approach to its statutory responsibility. NCC are currently responsible for maintaining 83 schools across the county, and surveys at the last tranche of 24 schools were completed in early 2019. Funding for this budget for the 2019-20 financial year will be provided by a 2.893 million in school condition allocation funding received from central government. At the moment, the government provide this money to us and we hold it until something happens, and then we have to apply for the money, which I have to bring to Cabinet for approval, and when a Cabinet approves, then we can go back and do the required works in schools. This is a lengthy process and sometimes affects our schools in the way that we don't want it to be affected, where they might have no heating or classrooms out of use or something of that sort. So this I've forgotten where it is now, 2.893 million is to put into a pot so that with the approval of the DCS, this work can be undertaken at short notice. So this is what we're asking you to do, to hold this money for emergency repairs at short notice.
Thank you, Councillor Baker.
That's it.
Councillor Meredith.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I would support this because if we go back a little bit into history, when the schools was under our control, we had a minor works budget then, and it was very, very effective, and that allowed some of the we had what we called a HT book, which if you worked as a caretaker in a school or a head teacher, you could get the builders in to do emergency repairs, and I think it's a good thing that this is being reintroduced. It's just a pity that we lost control of the schools that are not within the association now. But it's a good thing that because there'll be a lot of repairs that they can go directly to get done as an emergency. So I would support this anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Refer to Councillor Roy.
I know you're keen on the question, so let me start with the question. I express concern. I'm asking why there isn't a quality impact assessment for this particular paper. It is a key decision, and as such, I think it deserves one. I've been fortunate enough to be sitting on the CCNF County Council negotiating forum with the unions, where not one but all of the unions have been expressing concern about the lack of audit in terms of asbestos in schools. Now, and we don't even have this information for the schools that our local authority run. I think we need to have information that informs the equality impact assessment, and that in itself would be informing your decision making around this fund. Obviously, to have a fund that is more easy to access and to implement is of benefit, but we need to make sure that we're doing things equitably, and that does not necessarily mean treating all people the same. I think it's also salient to acknowledge that the equality expertise from the County Council over the last 10 years have been stripped bare, and I'm concerned that senior officers aren't getting the support they need to make sure that they're taking the right decisions on which papers require equality impact assessments. There is no equality impact assessment for any of the papers this afternoon, and actually to pay due regard to equality is a statutory obligation. So I just put that to you. And again, this was one of the other questions that I submitted in advance, didn't get an answer to, but I accept you did come and speak to me a few minutes beforehand, but to be honest, it's not answering my question.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we could ask the monitoring officer to comment on whether this needs equalities impact assessment with this paper.
Well, Leader, I'm not sure that I'm able to answer that question right away. I'd have to go and have a look at it, not being prepared in advance for giving an answer today, but I can certainly look at it for you and come back. Thank you.
Councillor Bacon.
We have just put a team in place to go and do asbestos checking on all of our schools, so that will be happening. We didn't have the team before, but we do now have someone in place to be going and checking the asbestos on all of our schools. It was supposed to be the schools themselves that did the checking, but it's come to our notice that this isn't happening, so we have now put a team in place in order to do that for the future.
Thank you. Cabinet, do we agree the report? Thank you. So item 13, the Northamptonshire Adult Services Commissioning Framework for provision of care and support services for people with a learning disability. We've got Mrs Lineker down to speak on this in the next item. So if you could condense your comments to cover both in one go, if that's okay. Thank you, Jean. You perhaps better use it because we're being recorded.
Right, I'm here to talk about the framework that you're on with disabilities. Now, I go to a carers meeting, and when you put them from 18 to 21, you put them in a control, so that they can manage themselves within the difficulty of what they have. They put him in flats, 18 to 21. Now, to me, they need more support when they go into it, when leaving the care services. When leaving the care services, they need to learn how to wash up, how to wipe up, how to keep their place tidy in general. I don't think this is being done or being checked on. Can I ask these people to be checked on? It is necessary for them to be checked on. Another thing with some learning difficulty is when they go to centres, and centres that are day centres, there have been cutbacks there because there's no staffing to look after those centres. There is people there, but they're adding more and more responsibility to that centre with more and more difficulty with disabilities. They should have the professionals to help with that disability. Okay? I can't stress more that they need support. My 21-year-old nephew with disabilities didn't get that support years ago, and I would like that to happen. When they're asking for support and go into the care, they need support there, and some good support with disabilities, because there are many disabilities within the curriculum, and I'd like to know who goes out and inspects these flats and inspects these houses where they go. I saw a chap on the bus the other day. He had a carer with him, but he looked really dirty, and he had a disability. And to me, that's not fair on that disability person. They should be respectful and looked after carefully. That's all I'm saying on that one. That's it on that one. Can I go on item 14 now?
Yes, please.
This is the one I supported in 2016. This is for children in care. I supported this because when you leave the care services, you need some support. I didn't get that. I said that before in SEND, when SEND first started happening. But I would like an extension. You're asking for an extension for 2020. Now, Unitary starts in 2021, or so I'm told. It needs to go to 2021 for their support. If you're in a care situation, each child, or 18 to 21, needs that support. Okay? That's all I'm basically saying. And also, when there are abuse cases and they're 18 to 21, they need to see someone like a psychiatrist. I never got that. A psychiatrist will help them try and sort the abuse out of whatever they needed. And they do need support, believe you me. And it's hard to get your report back when you're an adult from care services. I think that's basically all. Oh, Anne Longford, I must do this one. Anne Longford, Children's Commissioner in England, did turn around and say there are more and more vulnerable children coming into care throughout England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales. And she's asking the government for more funding, which is what we should have done in the first place. As a county, ask our MPs to take it forward into the government. The government needs to support vulnerable children and vulnerable disability children. We're getting more and more of these people, all right? That's what she said, and I'm sorry I missed the figure. I do apologise for that, but I'm no good at figures anyway. And I'm grateful to Councillor Longley for having more figure work than what I've got. But I am very mindful on fostering. When they are abused, even from a foster parent, you have to check the fostering parent vigorously. Because I know of a foster parent that abused children. And I think that's wrong. And this is becoming more and more. So be careful, be mindful, and watch out what they're doing within fostering care.
Okay, thank you, Jean.
That's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
But the questions are, please be careful with children and vulnerable children.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Morris, could you introduce item 13, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is an interesting paper, I'm sure you'll agree, and there are 3 documents in this paper of relevance. There's the Draft Commissioning Framework for Learning Disability Services 2019 to 2024, which strengthens the contractual and service expectations of all learning disability provision, taking into account national policy and good practice. The second one is the Joint Commissioning Strategy for Learning Disability for 2019 to 2024 for health and social care. This outlines what we intend to focus on over the next 3 years, taking into account national requirements and local issues that need addressing. The third paper, or the third document, sorry, is the Joint Annual Commissioning Plan for 2019 to 2020 for health and social care. The decision we're asking for is to request delegation of the decision making to Anna Earnshaw in order to finalise the commissioning framework and proceed to tender. These documents will form a linchpin of our adult social care policies and learning disability policies going forward, and therefore are very important. There are a number of savings connected to these documents as well, and if anyone wants any context for these documents, have a look at the strategy document and the commissioning plan document. I don't propose to say too much more about it other than that, and note the papers and obviously note the decision with Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Leader. I just want to raise Jean Lineker raised a very important issue. you know that I'm a member of the board of the new charity which has been set up, and to some respects the charity is going to be very important to the County Council. It's going to give an input to especially looked after children with learning disabilities that we will be able to take on board and be able to look after. And that's one of my ambitions about being on. And Adrian, the independent chair, asked me to do a paper, which I done, on how I see the charity going on. And this is one of the realms in which I want it to happen. Some of the things that I put into the paper, he's come back onto me and he's very, very interested in what I have to say. But I am concerned that the charity is already in a little bit of trouble. We've lost our main person who was our leader. He worked when it was her role to go out to the different organisations and to raise money for our charity. And I hope that we can get somebody in place to replace, and I know that is happening. But this charity can fill the gap. It can definitely fill the gap left by the County Council, because we can give a service to them looked after children with learning disabilities that the County Council can't. So what I'm saying to the County Council, I'm hoping, especially with the Chief Executive, we'll put an impetus into this charity to make sure that it does work. We've got a group of people that have now come forward and have got a really great vision, and if this works it's going to be really good. So I'm just saying, please put some input into it. And for Jean's point, this charity can definitely pick up some of the areas that thing, and I hope that Adrian will submit my paper to you so you can have a look at some of my views of how I see it going. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dennis. Just on that point, very quickly, the Chief Exec and I have met a couple of times now with Adrian to talk about the work of the charity. So we want, of course, we all want it to be as successful as possible. Councillor Scott.
And defer to Councillor Stowe.
Thank you, Chair. Lots of stuff for reflection in this report, lots of information, and I really like the I statements and the framework that's being developed. I'm really passionate about the whole notion of transformation, and so I am disappointed, I have to say, overall, because what I've been expecting from all the work, and very good work that's been done, is something more transformative, I have to say. And I'm wondering why that isn't happening. So I am aware, as you all are, that going to the private sector means we're paying for people's profits, we're paying for their company infrastructure, we're paying over the odds for the services that we're getting. So the other day, as part of my foster parenting training, I was given an example that foster parents cost us £450 a week, say, but through an agency, the cost is something like £900. That is a huge difference, and I really resent it. That is money that should be being spent on the client group, in this case, adults with learning disabilities. So I am confused about why, when we know now what is wrong, page 58 tells us what has been going wrong, somewhere else near the front talks about us having a poor service, the providers have been giving us a poor service. If we have such a rich understanding now of what has been going wrong, what hasn't been adequate, what is good practice, why have we not got the confidence then to start providing this more cheaply, more effectively, with better outcomes in-house? I don't get that. And I really think as well that one of the things that is missing here for me is an understanding of the variability of need, which isn't just predicated on what the disability is, but is also predicated on the cultural context. So, for example, people with learning disabilities from Africa who do not speak English, who have a different cultural expectation, have to have their needs met in a particular way. There doesn't seem to me to be any consideration of how variable that might be and the kind of flexibilities that we need to build into the system. Those kind of flexibilities would be best provided in-house. And I am sad that we haven't yet got the confidence to start thinking along those lines.
Thank you. Councillor Hakewell.
Thank you, Leader. I like this report. I think it's excellent. And those life chances which many of us more able-bodied just take for granted are so crucial to those who don't have those same mobility and those same options in life. So very happy with what I see here. I would just like to ask the portfolio holders, and there's more than one, and I commend the portfolio holder for adult social care and Anna on this, if they are looking favourably on the county's libraries as welcoming, non-denominational, friendly places where people with such disabilities can communicate and gain life skills. And will the portfolio holders consider that cross-budgeting across the different areas, when we talk public health, we talk libraries, adult and children's, to actually look at cross-budgeting in order to create the libraries, howsoever they are being managed in the future, to be places where people with disabilities can go, can learn and can gain life skills. And Leader, you wouldn't expect me not to mention Rothwell, where within the bids that have come in, there's a very, very innovative process of working with an academy trust, with young people who do, I don't say suffer, but do almost benefit from different abilities to be able to use the library. And one of the things, coming back to the same theme, I think also Kingsthorpe, if I'm right, are looking at a similar process. So on the one hand we have an adult social care budget of 180 million, on the other hand we're trying to reduce our costs in libraries. I'm sure there could be some cross-budgeting, and I'd quite like to hear in broad terms whether the portfolio holders are looking at that, because we have an amazing asset in those libraries however they go forward in the future, and it could be a way of helping to sustain them at the same time as meeting some of the commissioning responsibilities in this report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Longley, did you have a comment?
Just very brief, Chair, is that I'd draw your attention to item 8B, and that is the risks associated with not undertaking the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucy, DPH, did you want to make a comment?
Specifically.
Yep, on the library specifically. Obviously, I now have handed that portfolio over to Kerry, but I continue to work with the libraries team on two things specifically. One is obviously the continued commitment that I made to fund the Universal Children's Centre services, which wherever we possibly can will continue to be provided within libraries. But we've also started to explore this week an option to develop libraries, particularly the ones that remain in statutory control of the council in future, as sort of community hubs. So looking at exactly what you've been talking about, developing a health and wellbeing offer that sits within those libraries, linked in with adult learning. So again, that looks at some of the skills and qualifications that can be delivered locally, but building on that community resource that already exists in those services.
Thank you. And it's remiss of me not to welcome Kerry, who's the new AD for Corporate Services, Kerry Pennell, sitting next to Councillor Hawley. So welcome to NCC and our organisation. Did you have any comments you wanted to add? Or
Only that I echo what Lucy had said. I'm obviously sort of into day 7 here, but that's one of the things that we've looked at and recognised that there is an opportunity, but there are some libraries that are already very much acting as community hubs, and we need to learn from those and see how we can promote that further in other parts of the estate moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Morris. Well, let's pick your point
I'll
up
pick them
offline.
up now, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Lucy said an awful lot of what I would have said, but I think we cross-budget already to a large degree across many of the portfolios, particularly in the library area, which provides a lot of services in public health, education, all sorts of things. And we need to encourage that to continue. And will that continue? Yes, I'm sure it will. So it's not a direct answer to your question as whether we'll consider cross-budgeting to help save your library, but it will be I meant all libraries, not your library, but it is certainly something that we're already working on, I would say, so we'll continue to look at that. Councillor Stone, I would answer that question. She's still here. Oh yes, you are still here. Essentially, that's why we've got this framework, because we know that the private market is expensive, and this will help hopefully control some of that area. I mean, I don't know whether Anna wants to say any more about that, but that's essentially the message on that. It's to control expectations and service provisions and the outcomes. So that's all interlinked with all these papers. And as it goes forward, we'll see how that sort of pans out, I suppose, for the future. The framework, I believe, is updated every year anyway, isn't it, Anna? So, you know, we'll be able to change it slightly or alter it as we go along. But the whole point is to try and control the private marketplace a bit, because we have quite a large budget in this area. It's £63 million, so it's not an insignificant spend. So we've just got to make sure we use that money as best we can for the residents of Northamptonshire that utilise those services. So I would say that's the reason for this report. Dennis, I think the leader alluded to your question, and hopefully if there's any further points that we can make, then we will. Anna, did you want to come in on that at all?
Yes, please. Just a couple of points really, picking up things that have been said. So Councillor Stone, it's a shame that if you are disappointed in a sense, because this paper and the strategy was built on consultation with users about what they told us that they wanted, and this was their feedback, and that's where the I statements came from, and that's how we've been developing it based on professional and user feedback. But the other thing I would say is we already have one of the biggest in-house LD services there is. And we deal with the most complicated, most expensive and most challenging customers in-house already. Part of this solution may well be that we do keep some things in-house and we grow some things in-house too. I'd also sort of add, just picking up some general points made, we have the biggest adults shared lives or adults fostering scheme in the country for LD. And we also do the whole regional support network for learning skills, life skills, employment skills for learning disabled people, both in terms of running it on behalf of the DWP and one that we run ourselves, the live service, which is really, really successful. So I think we are doing quite a blended approach and actually have had some real success. We might not always sing about it too loudly, but absolutely we will use in-house services where that makes sense, and if we can commission better outcomes for people that meet their needs in better ways through the market, we'll do that too, as long as we can actually deliver the kind of care that's needed and the outcomes that those people say that they want to achieve.
Thank you. Councillor Morris, anything further to add?
Yeah, yes, a couple of things, if that's all right. I just wanted to thank Jean Lineker, as always, for her input and her... she left us, has she? But we'll do it anyway. Thank you very much for her input, as always. It's always very valuable, so we'll try and come back to her on that point. But there were a couple of other things I wanted to just talk about, which Anna sort of alluded to, which is the sort of overall budget of adult social care and the pressures that it's under. And, you know, we've had some reports of wild overspends of £6 million not so long ago, which are, as we can see from these documents, not actually coming to fruition, thanks to the hard work of Anna and her team to control their budgets very, very well. Everything's been managed within the overall envelope of the adult social care budget. And I think it's a little bit irresponsible to suggest that there's been a large overspend, when in fact, if you look at period 2, there is an overspend, but given the overall scale of the budget. I would say it was remarkable that the slippage has only been that much, and it will be managed within the period of this year. So I just wanted to add those points, although not necessarily pertinent to the paper. It does add to the the good work that the social care team are doing across the piece to manage their budgets, as are every directorate, against the pressures that Matt and Teresa have already alluded to. So that was my comment. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Cabinet, we happy to agree the report? Thank you.
Directly out of what was said, the point was made.
Sorry, Councillor Hagel, you could pick these points up at the end.
No, I think
we're not turning this into a debate.
Not non-statutory,
right.
And we don't cross-fund. We cross-fund.
Right, can you be quiet, please, or leave?
No, I think it's fair to.
Thank you. Cabinet, are we happy to approve item 13? Thank you.
15 is without.
Yeah. So can we just remember that it's Cabinet's meeting, I'm the chair, you had your chance to speak, Councillor Hakewell, and it's not a debate. Well, that's not up to you, is it? Thank you. Item 14, Councillor Baker.
Thank you very much, Leader. First of all, before I give the information on this particular paper, I would just like to assure Mrs Lineker that actually it's very sad when we hear of the tales that she gives us of how it was when she was young, and we all feel very, very sorry that you had all of these dreadful things that happened to you. But I just wanted to assure you and other members here that we now have a system for all care leavers. They have a PA who regularly checks up on them, and it is also on the list of Ofsted inspections. When they come, they check that to make sure that we are doing that as well. So we do not abandon them, we do look after them, and they do have training courses on how to cook, how to look after themselves and that sort of thing. So just to reassure you that we actually are doing those things. I'd just like to introduce this paper to you, and it's concerning the new procurement arrangements for foster care and residential care for children in care. Independent supported accommodation and supported lodgings for young people leaving care and domiciliary care, and community activities for young people with special educational needs are all covered by this framework. At the moment, we are in a contract with a group of county councils covering the whole of the East Midlands in a procurement framework. We spend £53 million on placements. This current framework ceases in 2020. So we do need to look at another framework and put this in place. And I see this as a great opportunity for us to make some changes here and do the things that we have all said that we will want to do for our children, and that is to actually concentrate our efforts on having them in their own county and bringing them back into our county. So with this in mind, our new framework that we're proposing will give us the opportunity to set up our own framework for Northamptonshire and use local county provision. This giving us the right services in the right place for our children and young people. And I'm sure that's what we all want to see. At the moment, we spot purchase the domiciliary care, and this is very costly. So this will also be brought into the framework, and this will reduce our costs. This new arrangement will be with your approval for 4 years, and we are seeking your approval for delegated authority to be given to the Director of Children's Services, Sally Hodges, and the lead member for Children, Families and Education, myself, to launch the procurement process leading to the award of contracts. So I do hope that you see this at the opportunity that I see it, that we will at last be able to locate our children in the county that they should be in with their families. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Meredith.
Yeah, thank you for some of the points you made, and I agree with you. Some of the points are very useful. When you're a child, and whatever happens to you as a child, whatever situation it is, it always comes out from your life right throughout to when you even get to 77. You never forget the bad things that happened to you as a child. So it's quite important for us as a county council to make sure that the children are getting the best support and the best efforts that are put into them, and I think that's quite important. The other thing I think I've got to say, and this may be a bit controversial, but I hope that when this exercise of voluntary redundancies has taken place, that nobody from Children's Services will be given redundancy if they seek it, because I think that would be awful for Children's Services if that was to happen. And the question I'm really putting to you is, if anybody does apply for voluntary redundancy from Children's Services, it should be turned down. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I remember being on corporate parenting for quite a long time, where we were developing a vision for our children and for our care leavers, which included what we thought their rights should be. And that included things like having their own passport, their driving licence, all kinds of things. What we talked about then was bringing residential care in-house, was about recruiting more foster carers. I am shocked, therefore, that when I found that we were putting 16, 17-year-olds into supported accommodation, what a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to be doing. So I'm really glad to be reading in this documentation that we're looking at supported lodgings. I've been advocating that for quite a long time now. That is clearly something that should be happening. I've got a question about what's happened to Belinda Ferris House. I think where we do use supported lodgings, we need to be aware that 18-year-old young people who've had traumatic experiences are not emotionally 18. They might be emotionally 12 or 14. They need a lot more support in supported housing than they are getting at the moment. I visit quite a few children and youth. I mentor them. So I know that the quality of care they're offered is very variable. Some of it is excellent and some of it, frankly, is completely inadequate. There needs to be a lot of other things going on as well. If young people are in supported accommodation, they are extremely vulnerable to predators, they are extremely isolated and can be very lonely. A 21-year-old said to me recently, Danielle, in my culture, in my country, none of us ever stay away from home, even for one night. We are not used to being on our own. We do not live like that. And I think we need to take those cultural expectations into account when we're placing young people as well. We need to be doing something so that young people who go to school or college during the week, when they come home to an empty room or an empty house, don't feel socially isolated and left adrift. We need to be providing much more social opportunities for them, and that goes 5 times more at the weekends. I often see young groups of people I know, young people I know, drifting about town. They're amazingly visible. They're extraordinarily vulnerable. In my view, we are not doing all that we could be to keep them safe and protected and away from predators. Our young people are being housed in supported housing in the very same areas where we know there are county lines and where they are at risk of exploitation. We need to be doing an awful lot more. I think we should be bringing our services in-house.
Thank you. Councillor Naden-Hawley, did you want to have a comment on this paper?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's, I don't know. Our friends on the opposition, just before I want to say something, I just want to say this. Our friends on the opposition this afternoon seem to be talking about all the things that they're unhappy with and are not happening. But in actual fact, there's a lot of positive things happening. And I think we have to really change the dialogue and don't use our cabinet meetings for political grandstanding. It's not the place. Full council is the place where we should be doing that. Well, other people, they may be got their own, but that is just my opinion, and I'm entitled to my opinion. Also, I'd just like to say that I welcome this looking at the contracts, because for far too long we've been paying more than we need to look after our children. We need to bring them back into Northamptonshire, and I think this is an ideal opportunity for looking at how we're going to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sally, Director, you got some comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a response to the issue about voluntary redundancy. Voluntary redundancy in this authority and in every other authority I've worked in requires a manager's agreement. So we would not agree to anyone being made voluntary redundant if they were in a mission critical post. So I need to give you an assurance about that. The other thing for me about the comments that were made by Councillor Stone, a number of comments that she made which I totally and absolutely agree with. Loneliness in young people is a serious social issue that we all face. It's not just children in care, it's children across our whole, the whole of the spectrum, and it's something that our PAs try very hard to deal with in supporting young people as they go through and out of the system. You will be aware of the fact that we are trying to develop an adolescent service in the authority. We're working with every agency that we can, with our colleagues in public health, our colleagues in health services, and our PC Police and Crime Commissioners unit is supporting us in this and developing a much more holistic wraparound service to support young people, primarily to avoid them coming into care, but also to help them have better and more substantial life opportunities. I think Councillor Stone is right. We are clear, we do understand that we have mixed quality in some of the services that we can procure for young people, and part of the rationale for this paper is to be able to have much more of a control over the quality of the services that we are able to procure. And my final comment would be about the increase in fostering. I absolutely recognise that we need to be expanding our horizons in terms of fostering. I met with our Foster Care Association this week. Those foster carers are a very talented, able and committed group. We need to be able to expand what we do with foster carers, the kind of fostering that we do and the support that we can give to them in order that we can widen the remit of children that can benefit from a fostering place as opposed to a residential place, and certainly a placement within the county so they can access our schools and keep their social contacts and be nearer their families, all the things that we know are important to young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker, is there anything you wanted to add?
Just to say an answer to a question that Councillor Stone did ask me earlier about Belinda Forreston House, which actually is a building that does belong to the County Council, but actually the services there are performed by Homes to Inspire, and they just use the building that belongs to us, so it's not us that's providing that service there. So nothing else other than to put this paper to Cabinet, please.
Thank you. Cabinet, do we agree with the report? Thank you. So item 15 is a pink paper, and we have to ask press and public if they would leave, please. Sorry. Sorry, Jean, we have to ask you to...
I thought you might.
Yeah, thanks.
I've just given a note.
Councillor Godby, we need you to get Cabinet to resolve to go into private session, please.
Okay.
You've got the wording in your briefing note. You need to read that wording out and get Cabinet to agree it, if you would please.
Okay. Okay, well, press and public are leaving. I have to read this out for Cabinet to acknowledge that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds...
Just keep quiet.
Yeah, okay. Could we just ask for them quiet in the background, please? of business on the grounds that if public were present, it would likely that exempt information under Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act of the descriptions against each item would be disclosed to them. So we would ask if Cabinet note that.
Recording on.